You're watching Latino Talk TV. I'm your host, Jose Luis Jimenez.
And I am Ben Mendez.
Who are you?
My name is Enrique Arana.
Okay, Enrique Arana is a very special guest host with us tonight, and he is a graduate, or soon-to-be graduate. You already
That's
graduated?
correct. Graduation is this Friday.
Awesome.
And it'll be a big event. We've invited all the city of Houston, and we'll be honoring the late Senator Mario Gallegos. So if you can make it out, it'll be at Mecca. For sure to be good times.
Okay, so we haven't told you what he's graduating from. He is a graduate of the NHPO, National Hispanic Professional Organizations Leadership Institute. What class is this now?
This is Class 8.
Class 8. So if you haven't heard about the NHPO Leadership Institute, I highly recommend you Google it. And if you want more information on that, what number do you think they should call, Ben?
They can call me at 832-609-0145.
Okay. Tell about the LI. I mean, it's a wonderful program.
The Leadership Institute is basically a semester course every other Saturday, January to May in the fall semester. I'm sorry, in the spring semester. We are actually taking candidates as we speak. We're going to be doing the interview process in the next couple of weeks to determine who's going to be in the January class. The classes are basically, they're made so that you can become a better nonprofit board member. So the classes include team building, conflict resolution, leadership styles, diversity, and maybe you can help me. Mm-hmm. What other classes I'm missing?
Just all around self-improvement. I know personally I've gained a lot of experiences and learned a lot about myself and other individuals in my class. So a lot of teachings on communication, strategy, planning, presentation building, and maintaining a positive image in the community.
Media training. So all of these classes are good. I would say that for those of you that want to get involved in the Latino community, this is a great avenue to do so.
Yep, and actually, if not just the Latino community, but being able to relate to the different organizations that are out there and the different ways to interact with people. I mean, the LI has some really great efforts in creating cultural competency and learning how to deal with other people, other types of backgrounds. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And Jose is actually one of our instructors. I don't know how he did that, but who did you pay?
You! Don't lie to the people, they know.
But actually, Jose teaches public speaking.
I don't know how I got into that, but anyways, in all honesty, it's one of the best programs I've seen yet, and we want to show off some of the things that are going off. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And what we're going to do right now, just so you know, the show is live here at Houston Media Source in the Greater East End here on Harrisburg. And today's show is going to be very interesting because we're going to cover a couple things. Number one, we're going to get into getting ready for the holiday season and the stresses that come with it. Okay. In addition to that, we're going to cover a very, very unique topic that is not uncommon for Houston. We may not talk about it all the time, but it happens every day, and that's actually going to be child labor trafficking. Their children are being picked up, for lack of a better word, or being enticed into a world where they can travel, and what end up being is just human trafficking, but in a different way. So there is a nonprofit here in Houston that specializes in that sort of help for the community, and we want to make sure you are aware of the resources that are there to protect our children from falling into that type of world. Okay? So that being said, let's talk about what's going on in the community. Ben, what's going on?
Well, I'll start off at the national level.
Okay.
As you all know, the government right now is in a lockdown, if you will. Mm-hmm. Republicans and the Democrats can't seem to get along right now, and they can't agree upon fiscal terms. And if they don't agree by a certain date this month, mm-hmm. We are going to be losing funding for some of the programs that exist. So what are your thoughts on the lock, if you will?
I've been reading up on everything that's going on at the federal level, and the reality is, from what I understand, what we're talking about is that we're going to have a lot of these tax breaks and tax cuts that were given throughout the years. They're going to end, and with that ending comes the increase, or let's not call it the increase, the return of the normal tax levels.
Tax code.
Tax code.
That's correct.
So the tax breaks that were temporary, because these tax breaks are these I call them enticements, or these entitlements were not meant to be permanent. you know. So we're just going back to what it should have been, or what it should have been from a long time ago. When we had a surplus during Clinton, then we issued these tax cuts, which ended up reducing the surplus that was going to be in place. And then we added 2 wars. So speaking on fiscal terms, I'm not going to be, I mean, are we all going to pay a little bit more? Yes. But is that really a detriment to the country? Aren't we supposed to be taking care of each other as a community?
Well, the way I look at it is this is just another showdown. You have your Republican Party and your Democratic Party facing off one more time. How many times is the American public going to accept this? I mean, we do this over and over again. This is, I guess, a good thing for those that say we should have one party versus a 3-party system. We have all these other parties that are getting more popularity, if you will. Especially the independents that can go either way, Republican or Democrat. I really believe that we need to go that way.
Yeah, I think it's a recurring theme right now in the government. You know, it just in my mind, I keep hearing that it's a stalemate in the government. We can't get anything done. We can't agree, and at the end of the day, the public is who's going to pay for it, and it's terrible. So hopefully they can come to some kind of consensus and get something moving forward. But I know a number of times Obama has publicly chastised the Republican Party to agree and help move policy forward. Yep.
Well, the other thing that we heard in the news recently was our famous singer, Miss Rivera, passed away. Her plane crashed in Mexico. And now, you think with all the technology that we have nowadays, how can something like that continue to happen?
Well, I mean, you cannot stop plane crashes from happening, but let's look at some of the details that have surrounded this situation. Number one, it was a 43-year-old airplane. Number two, that plane in itself had an accident in the past. It had changed hands in the past. So we also have to look at, some of the decisions that were made as to why that plane continued to be in the air. What are the rules surrounding the ability for small jets and private jets like that to continue flying? Because even, think about it, a 43-year-old car, is it considered to be a safe vehicle? Why are we allowing a 43-year-old plane to continue to be in the air? Do we allow that for commercial airlines?
Well, just so you're aware, the age of an airplane is a lot different than an age of a car. Just so you know, I don't know anything about airplanes. I have a 50-year-old plane, believe it or not, but the mileage is very low. And so it works just fine. But the problem that I see is that we have so many radars, we have so many detectors, we have all this equipment where we're able to detect some of this stuff before an accident does happen. Why are we not using that equipment?
Well, what do we know about this airplane in itself and the situation? The pilot was 78 years old, from what I've read. How old? Not that I have anything against senior citizens, on the contrary, but even when you get to a certain age with your driver's license, you start getting checked even, more, there's more checks to that. So what are the rules around this situation? And
where did this crash happen? I'm not sure if I know too much about it.
In the mountains in Mexico.
Okay. And what about the regulations and safety precautions in Mexico government? Maybe they're not as stringent as the ones here in the U.S.?
That would be correct. Yeah.
So there was an American-owned airplane flying in Mexico that unfortunately crashed. From what we hear now, of course, the story unfortunately has evolved, but as of right now, it has Jenny Rivera's airplane crashed, leaving around 3:30 in the morning out of Monterrey, Mexico, after performing in front of a sellout crowd of 17,000 people, heading over to Mexico City to Toluca, and then she ended up unfortunately crashing. And as of right now, everyone's considered unfortunately dead. But that being said, my condolences to the family, her children, she had 5 children and 2 grandchildren. It's a major tragedy for anyone who loses their life on a daily basis.
And then we had another tragedy with the Dallas Cowboys. There was one of our players actually was driving and created an accident.
You're a Cowboys fan?
I'm a Cowboys fan and a Texans fan. Oh. Does that count?
No, it doesn't. I'm sorry.
Just this season?
The show ends now. You cannot No, no. You cannot be a Dallas Cowboys fan and a Texans fan.
So unfortunately, we had one person that died as
Yeah,
a
I'm
result of
sorry.
a car wreck.
I heard he flipped his car.
Did
That's
he really?
correct.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
heard he flipped
terrible
his car.
situation.
Now, this is 2 weeks in a row that we have a fatal accident, if you will, in the NFL. Now, what are your thoughts on this?
Just I think it's sad to hear that this accident happened, but at the same time, I think they put themselves in that position. They were driving under the influence. It looks like they were partying the night through, and then they were heading to the airport to go to the game, and things happened, and now we have consequences. Someone passed away. We have parentless children because of the incident, and now we have someone in jail. That has to live with the consequences of killing a teammate and a dear friend, probably. So it's very sad to hear.
Looking at the situation, a lot of these players end up getting to that level of success very, very quickly. They come out of college, and the next thing you know, they have tens of thousands, hundreds of $1,000 contracts on a yearly basis, $1 million contracts, and I don't know if there's actually coaching or mentoring to make sure that they can learn how to live with that type of level of success. Because we got to understand, some of these football players come from nothing, and all of a sudden they're multimillionaires, and they blow through their money, and and same thing with NBA players. You see that all the time. They're tremendously successful, and next thing you know, they're broke. So what kind of coaching can the NFL do to make sure they mentor their players better?
Well, I don't think we can mentor in that way. I think there needs to be some guidelines set forth. First of all, he shouldn't have been partying until the wee hours of the night before they took off in the airplane. So I think the NFL just needs to clamp down.
But how? I mean, do you control these adults and say, okay, you're a tremendously successful football player, you're one of our best performers, but we're going to babysit you now, and you're going to come to this hotel, and we're going to lock the door, make sure you don't do anything crazy.
Well, keep in mind, this gentleman was caught DUI prior.
Right.
He had already spent some time in jail because of his first offense.
Wow.
Yeah, and so this is really his second offense. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the judge. Does he throw the book at him, or does he let him walk?
I think it's going to be a case of getting that superstar treatment. They get that specialty care because he's a celebrity.
Well, he didn't get it the first time.
Exactly. And, this goes back to one of my coworkers actually told me earlier, when these guys are growing up in high school and middle school even, and even in college, when they do something wrong, they get a slap in the wrist and they never learn from their mistakes. And then it just kind of adds up over time. And then you have a final, event that you can't really get a slap on the wrist for. So maybe it's years and years of, getting a slap on the wrist and them never learning from those mistakes. But I don't know what's going to happen. Honestly, I don't think he's going to get away with it.
Well, I don't think there's anything to get away from. I mean, from what's out there, it appears that the individual is going to end up having to pay for quite some time, and hopefully this is his bottom. As they say, alcoholics have to hit bottom, drug addicts have to hit bottom. Hopefully this is that moment that changes his life forever, to where he gets away from doing those types of things, and this doesn't occur again.
Well, the other thing that came out in the news recently, as you all know, Prince Harry's wife was in the hospital for morning sickness, supposedly. And there was a prank done by two DJs. And the DJs called the hospital. The nurse picked up the phone, and the two DJs pretended to be, I believe, the Queen and I forget who else. But apparently the nurse had given them information, and this information was aired on radio. So the pranksters were able to succeed in getting information from this nurse. Well, that nurse was found dead. And they don't know if it's a suicide or something else happened, but it's a sad moment, I'm sure, for everybody involved. And these pranksters went a little too far. And by the way, they lost their show as a result of this, and the good thing they did.
Where did this happen?
This is in England.
In England. Wow.
But it's a tragedy. Number one, that it happened. Number two, but I don't know if you can blame the DJs for her committing suicide. I mean, it happens here all the time. You hear in the radio stations here in Houston, you know, back then one of the stations had Carmen calling, and they would prank call people all the time.
I disagree with you.
But how can you blame them
I
for that?
disagree with you, because you have two DJs that specifically called the hospital, and this nurse felt like because she was the brunt of the joke, if you will, it caused her some serious problems, either mentally or physically. It caused problems for her, and as a result, she might have committed suicide.
That might have been the last straw that broke the camel's back. Maybe she had some underlying issues that, you know, kind of led to this event.
So
Possibly,
what do
I
we
don't
do?
know.
Ban every single comedian that's out there? I mean, it's unfortunate. Yes, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there's no responsibility. Granted, they might have pushed her over the edge, but they didn't cause her directly to do that. I mean, yes. I mean,
Indirectly, they did.
Well, indirectly, but
Yeah.
everyone gets. Unfortunately, here in this country, people get ridiculed all the time. You know, you don't see people doing that.
Yeah, the DJs went over and beyond this time, and obviously the prince and his whole family is scrutinized, and any kind of media that someone can get off those two will obviously benefit them, their ratings and so forth. So their underlying reason for doing this has caused some serious problems.
So what? So should every radio show out there never prank call anybody else again?
I didn't say that, but they did it to this extreme.
Well, how is it extreme? You tried to get into some place, and they gave her the lady gave her information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, you're dealing with the federal government, the people that represent you at the highest levels. I mean, how many times can you call Obama and his family and try to get information like that?
But you don't think they've actually tried that here?
And I'm sure they have.
Yeah.
But they won't. They don't get very far here.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Well, so what? Is there anything else going on out there? State, local level?
Yeah, we have those two kids that were killed. They were pushing their vehicle because apparently the vehicle stalled on them, and they were pushing it off the road, and another vehicle came behind them and killed them. And the person that was in that vehicle was found with a gunshot to his head. So they don't know what happened there, but it was some type of accident, obviously as a result of the gunshot, but they don't know who is the one that was the cause of that.
Wow, that's just a terrible tragedy.
Yeah. So those are the main highlights, and unfortunately it's all negative news, but let me say one positive thing. The Houston Texans are playing tonight in
All right.
New England.
So you are watching the show live, and in about 45 minutes you'll switch over to that other station and watch the Texans game, and we will be running to the station too to make sure we watch it also. But before we do that, we do have a good 45 minutes with you right now. We want to make sure you're watching us, and we want you to call in. We are live here at Houston Media Source, and we're going to come right back after this break and talk about child labor trafficking. If you haven't heard about that before, you're going to hear about it now, and it's happening here every single day, even in some of the most affluent neighborhoods in Houston. Okay, so you are watching Latino Talk TV. We'll be right back. welcome back. You're still watching Latino Talk TV, and we really appreciate that you're joining us because we're going to get into a very important topic. It is going to be over child labor trafficking. If you haven't heard about that, we're going to get right into it. So, but before we do, we want to welcome once again our favorite psychotherapist, Dr. What do you call him?
Dr. Feelgood is here.
Dr. Feelgood is here. Robinson Arteaga is here with us. Welcome back.
Thank you
We
for having me
miss
back.
you.
He has the hairdo to go with it.
I know, man. It's all...
You got a haircut?
No. I actually have hair, so that's a good little tidbit. I got to take care of the curls.
I was trying to grow my hair out too, but my wife told me that I looked like, well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Anyways, I was growing it out, and she's like, you need a haircut now. So she took me yesterday and got my head shaved, so I was like, yeah, I had to do what I had to do. But regardless of that, let's get to the serious topic.
Sure.
I mean, it's going to be, hopefully, if we can have some fun with it, I know it's possible. But let me introduce to you Miss Kendra Penry, and she can introduce herself. I mean, go ahead, Kendra.
Sure. Well, my name is Kendra Penry, and I work with Houston Rescue and Restore Coalition. We're a nonprofit based in Houston, but we cover the entire greater Houston area, and our sole focus is to raise awareness about human trafficking through educating the public and training frontline professionals.
So I hear that Houston is a mecca for this kind of stuff. Okay.
Sure.
Now, how true is it? Are we really the capital here in the United States?
I wouldn't say the capital. I don't think anyone keeps statistics that would suggest which city is worse than another city. But we do know that the Department of Justice said that Houston is considered one of the most intense jurisdictions for trafficking in the country. And the reasons for that are huge. We have many of us could figure out on our own. We have large airports, we have the seaport, we have the I-10 corridor, which is a major transportation route for many trafficking victims across the United States. We have a large runaway population, a large first immigrant population, both of which are at very high risk for trafficking. And then we have many places to sell people here. We're a large community and it's easy to hide people here.
Sure. What I'm thinking about right now is the effects that this can have on a child. I'm thinking that one of the things that we as humans need is some sort of control to be sane, pretty much. And so whenever that is deprived of us, that it can turn into depression. Also with the type of thing that you have to do to move somebody, anxiety can happen and trauma then occurs for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. So how does a child get trafficked? I mean, what are some of the things that you've seen out there?
Well, there are two primary areas that we look at, labor trafficking and sex trafficking, and it's really a recruitment process for both of them. A lot of us have seen the news stories where the child gets kidnapped and gets taken, well, the movie Taken, for example, and then trafficked, but that's actually fairly rare. It's more common for us to see, if it's sex trafficking, a process of seduction that convinces the child to fall in love with their trafficker, and then you have the trauma bonding that the child is not going to want to turn in the person that's abusing them. And then on the labor trafficking side, we often see a very calculated recruitment that looks legitimate from the outside. It looks like a legitimate job offer, and you don't know until it's too late, until you've done something you weren't supposed to, or something bad has happened that it's actually not legitimate, and then you're stuck and you don't necessarily know where to go to get help.
And where do these kids usually go? I'm assuming they go up north somewhere.
It's all over, really. A lot of the kids that are recruited in Houston may travel outside of the state. We know there's many routes, Las Vegas, New Orleans, New York, Chicago, you name them. But it's really every city in this country, every town, every community has a problem with trafficking. It's just learning to identify it better. And we do have quite a few children and adults that are trafficked in Houston that are from Houston, and they actually never leave the city. We have children trafficked out of their own homes by their family members, by their parents. So not necessarily do they move. Some of them do, but it's not necessary to be classified as a trafficking victim that you actually move.
Is it fair to say that this is organized crime? You have, I guess, strings, if you will, to other cities where you have this network of thieves?
In some cases, yes, that is exactly what we're seeing, is a very calculated network of people that traffic from city to city, but we also have just individual traffickers, someone that that victim trusted, and then they end up being trafficked by them, and it's just a one-off, so to speak, that it's the only victim the trafficker has, and it's the only trafficker the victim knows. So it's not necessary that it be that network of trafficking to be classified as modern-day slavery, as we call it, but it is possible. We see both.
So what's the classification of a modern day slavery? Because
Sure.
you keep saying classification. So what is that?
Sure. Well, the exact definition is the use of force, fraud, or coercion, one of those three, to force someone to provide labor or commercial sex against their will. The element of work has to be involved, so there's some type of profit happening. Whether that profit is monetary isn't necessary. It could be profit that someone has a maid in their home, and they're not making money off of the person, but they're profiting, so to speak, by their labor. It can also be with young children, sex trafficking, where force, fraud, or coercion we don't have to prove. It's just the very fact that they're under the age of 18 and involved in commercial sex, they would be classified as a trafficking victim.
Wow. So have you worked directly with some of these children?
My organization is not a victim service provider, but I do have a prevention program that I run with young people in schools, in our juvenile detention centers, and juvenile probation to talk about what trafficking looks like and how individuals can avoid becoming victims, but also to empower them to create change, because we do have the ability to end slavery in our lifetime, but it requires that we start with young people and we give them the knowledge and the tools to do that. So our prevention program does just that, goes into these places to talk about how to avoid it, and through that program I have worked very closely with a number of girls who came forward and said, now that you're talking about this, I feel safe to admit that I've been there, and we're then able to connect them to social service providers that can help them rehabilitate.
Wow.
I think it's a delicate issue because, like you're mentioning, whenever they are being sex slaves, pretty much, there's a grooming process that occurs by the person that is enslaving them. And I think that it's important. I'd like to hear some of the tools that you give these young people, because that grooming process requires trust. Once that trust is established, it's very difficult, and that's what makes it hard for them to come out and talk. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's very true. The grooming process is all about creating a bond between the victim and the trafficker, so that then the victim doesn't want to turn them in. They love their trafficker, so to speak. So the tools that we give them are how to recognize someone who might be trying to take advantage of you, but also about self-esteem. We know that all young people are at risk for trafficking, whether they're from a poor home or from a rich home, whether they're from any ethnic background, it doesn't matter. All children are at risk, and what puts them at risk is low self-esteem. So we give them tools to deal with that, how to deal with when you have a bad day in a healthy way, and then also understanding healthy relationships. A lot of young people don't see healthy relationships modeled for them, so they don't actually understand when someone's taking advantage of them because they don't know any different. And so we talk about healthy relationships and what those look like. And then the biggest tool we give them are resources in the community. If something happens to you, if something happens to a friend, where do you go that is safe, that will not judge you, and that will actually give you the tools to come out of that in a way that doesn't put you at risk.
True.
So these kids are taken, I'm assuming, from their parents, and they're kidnapped, or the parents know that they're leaving town, or how does that work?
In some cases, we've seen them kidnapped, but it's fairly rare because that gets so much attention, and the last thing a trafficker wants is a lot of attention. So what we tend to see in a lot of cases is a seduction boyfriend process, where the young victim, whether male or female, falls in love with their trafficker through this calculated romance, and then the child may run away. And in many cases, we're actually seeing chronic runaways. These are the children that are running away from foster care, that have run away from home many times, and no one's reporting them anymore. So they're at such high risk because no one's going to look for them when they go missing. In some cases, it's parents that are trafficking their children. It's sad to have to admit that in our society, but it does happen. So there's many different ways that this happens. And with labor trafficking, a lot of times the reason it doesn't get reported is because the parents obviously and honestly believe that child has a good job and that child is going to earn money, and the child left willingly, answered a job ad in the newspaper or on Craigslist or on Backpage, wherever it was, and is now going to earn some money, and they don't report it right away because they don't recognize that it could be a labor trafficking situation.
So are children of non-citizen or non-resident parents some of the major targets for that? Or, some immigrant children, or some would call them undocumented children here?
Both undocumented and U.S. citizens are at high risk simply because of the lure of having something better, which it appeals to everybody, no matter where they come from. But the important thing to understand is that it doesn't matter. If you are undocumented or you are a U.S. citizen, if you are in this country, you are protected from becoming a slave, and you have the right to everything that a U.S. citizen has, to not be a slave, to have social services when you're rescued, to go to trial, to see your trafficker prosecuted, and then we have special programs that if someone is undocumented in this country and they've become a slave, we have special visa programs to make sure that if they feel safer here than going back home, then they can stay here legally.
Wow.
You know, when I'm hearing about the tools that you give them and that a lot of these kids don't see positive relationships at home, it reminds me of what I talk to about with parents. And one of the really important and easy things to do is just spending 15 to 20 minutes a day of positive time. That means when you're interacting and not necessarily correcting the child, but just kind of sharing what's been going on in their life at school, what are their interests. A lot of time we kind of just are stuck in our routine and what it is that we have to get done. And especially us as Latinos, one of the communication styles that we have with our kids is directives. Go put away your clothes, go do your homework, go take a bath. We don't dialogue with our kids, and that's something that we should make a point to do, especially to increase and strengthen the bond that we have with our kids.
And that being said, it also, I guess we have to take it to the next level, because we're assuming that the parent actually knows how to have a dialogue. A lot of times parents don't know that. And I've seen plenty of people out there, and I guess historically, it's just the way it was taught, because in the Latino community, it's the adults have the conversation, children get out, or children you do what you're told, right? I mean, I don't know if that's what the experience that you had. And really, I was taught how to have a conversation with my mom, but my dad growing up was the guy who told me what to do. I think, does that have an impact on children who fall into that weakness or have that self-esteem issue that comes from there?
Well, we know that a lot of times the way traffickers operate is doing just what he was just mentioning, is listening, because all children need to have that acknowledgement. And we're human beings. We need love, and we need someone to pay attention to us, and traffickers know that, and they use that as a way to lure children in, that I will listen to you and I will give you the attention that you want. But we also do have a program specifically for parents to do exactly what you're talking about, giving them tools to bring up this conversation. How do you even start it? And one of the biggest is just talking to your kids about how to get a job. We don't think about it. We tell our kids, go get a job so you can pay for the gas in your car, or you can pay for your cell phone. But we don't say, when you get that job, this is how much you should be paid. This is your legal right as far as rest breaks go. This is how many hours you should be working. We don't talk about those issues because we take for granted that they'll just get a good job because maybe we did in the past, or we haven't heard about this labor trafficking situation. And that's something that's so simple. It's not talking about feelings or anything like that some people get uncomfortable with. It's basic. How to bring up how to get a good job is one way to just open that gate. Or watching a movie. Get a movie about trafficking and sit down with your kids and watch it together, and then talk about what you saw and what does that mean and how could that affect our community and what can we do about it. Really simple strategies to bring it up that's not invasive and it's not difficult, but it gives the children and the parents the tools to deal with the issue.
So what age group, more or less, are we talking about as far as the kids?
Sure. Our most common age group in the U.S. as a whole is somewhere between 13 to 17. But last year in 2011, I did a very intensive research assessment here in Houston to really figure out what is Houston dealing with. And what we found is that the average age of victims seen here in Houston is somewhere around 15 and 16. So we're talking an awkward age at that point where a lot of people see them at that level of being able to take care of themselves, but they're still considered children. So how do we draw that line on getting them connected to services? They're almost an adult according to Texas law, but not quite, and figuring out how to make sure that they get back to school or wherever it is they need to be. But so we're seeing about 15 to 16.
You bring up a good point. So do they actually go to school when they're taken, or do they just go into the workforce and they're making money for whoever took them?
Most of the time you'll see a lot of truancy. They're not able to go to school. They're working nights, so how can you go to school during the day if they're involved in sex trafficking? And if they're involved in labor trafficking, they're having to meet a quota of something. You can't go to school and also meet your quota, so they're not necessarily in school. However, that's not to say that we haven't seen some victims that have gone to school every day and maintained fairly good grades, and they were trafficked at night out of their own homes. So it can be both. However, not going to school and truancy would be a little more common just because of the nature of the crime that's being committed against them.
So if they don't meet their quota, what would happen to them?
Well, in labor trafficking, what we're seeing most of the time involves traveling sales, selling something door to door, and they have a certain quota that they have to meet every day. And if they don't, that's when it becomes trafficking, because that's where those elements of force, fraud, and coercion come into play. So you don't meet your quota, you get beaten. Well, that's a type of physical force that's making you do something. Or you didn't make your quota, well, I'm going to deduct your paycheck, which we as adults know that that's actually not legal to do, but a young person that's never had a job before might not understand that that's not okay. Or you didn't meet your quota, so you get abandoned in whatever city you're in. Say you got picked up in Houston and got taken to Seattle, and all of a sudden you get left behind because you didn't meet your quota too many times and you don't have any money. How do you get home? So it is a form of punishment when you don't do what you're supposed to do.
So how do you break the mental cycle from that? I mean, once you're in it, how do you get out of it?
It's a great question.
I think it depends from person to person, because just like you can take it reminds me of one of the studies that I was reading about a pair of twins that grew up with a dad, and the dad was a criminal. The dad was a criminal, he was a robber, he was taken to jail, and these two boys grew up. One of them was a successful businessman, and the other one was not doing so well in life. He was getting in trouble with the law and whatnot. And so just like you can have two individuals that grow up under the same conditions, one may be able to have the resiliency to get out of that position, and one may have the perspective where he may feel like he was the victim, like dad was never there, and may kind of put the blame on that, while the other individual has focused on positive aspects or focused on himself and wanting to get out of that situation. But the resiliency may vary from person to person. It depends a lot on your attitude as well.
Okay. Well, we have Joseph. Joseph, you're live on the air. How are you tonight?
Hi, just fine. Thank you very much, Jose Luis and Ben. I'd like to ask Kendra a question. And what's the prosecution rate for someone that in your organization happens to run across a trafficker, and these children do not support the legal process? What's the conviction rate on somebody that gets caught doing something like this?
Well,
I'll turn on my TV and listen to the answer.
Joseph, is this Joseph Tejerina?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for calling.
Thank you for calling in. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
It's a great question to talk about prosecutions, because everyone wants to make sure that the bad guy gets put in jail. But it's a difficult one for us to talk about, because he made an excellent point that a lot of times you don't have a willing victim. It's much like what we see in domestic violence or in other cases of abuse, that your victim does not want to testify, and then how do you have a successful case? We do know that in Houston, we have a really great task force, the Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance, chaired by the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they are fabulous about making sure that they put that person away for whatever they can get. So I can't necessarily give statistics on how many traffickers get put away, because a lot of times they go to jail under a different charge. Something that's still going to put them in jail, maybe they found drugs, maybe it was kidnapping, maybe it was something else. So we don't have good numbers as far as exactly how many are going away, because we know it's more than the numbers that we have. But in Houston, we've had about 50 individuals convicted for trafficking, and the convictions are pretty intense. It's up to 20 years in prison unless it involves the kidnapping or sexual assault or sexual abuse, I should say, or of a minor, in which case it's life in prison. And we have seen a life in prison case here in Texas out of San Antonio for trafficking. So we take it very, very seriously here in Houston. And if we're able to get them for anything, we will. And I did just want to address really quickly this idea of services and how to break the cycle. We have a great service provider here in Houston as part of the task force, the YMCA International, and they work very carefully to make sure that each victim has a tailored case management process so that they get the services that they need on an individual level to be rehabilitated. And one victim may need much more intensive long-term care and another victim may not, but that's why we have them, to make sure each victim gets individualized, personalized care.
So have you all dealt with Catholic Charities?
Mm-hmm.
You have? Okay. And I'm assuming, because they're housing some of these folks that were in the sex trade, and they're rehabilitating them. I'm assuming that you have met with some of these folks at Catholic Charities to find out what they're doing.
We work very closely with particularly the legal side of Catholic Charities. They train with us quite frequently to let our law enforcement officers and other individuals in the community know about what legal rights victims have when they're rescued. So I don't work with their sheltering side. I know there's been a lot of changes on a national level about who is doing shelter for what victims. So we haven't worked as closely with that one, but we work very closely with their legal team to deal with that whole issue of T visas or visa programs for victims or civil suits for victims, whatever the victim needs.
Wow.
I'm thinking about, if the age range that you mentioned, the 13 through 17, that becomes a very difficult age for parents, especially if there hasn't been a history of positive relationships to deal with, especially for a parent. So I think that one of the things that I recommend a lot to parents is that the type of work that you do, the best type of work, is preventative. You have to start as when they're young to have that good relationship with your kids, because the longer you take or the longer that you're absent, the more that it increases the likelihood that you're not going to have good communication or just a good bond with your child.
Yeah, and I'm going to take it a different direction also, but what if you see, or what if you see a child being trafficked by their own parents? Because you talked about maybe some of these parents. Let's just be honest, in Houston, I would love to be able to say that every parent is a caring parent, but unfortunately the jail and the court system say otherwise, right? So how can we help that child that we may think is getting trafficked like that? I mean, what are the warning signs?
Well, there's a lot of warning signs, particularly if you do work with juveniles. Looking out for the signs of abuse that you would in general, signs of sexual abuse, signs of domestic abuse, they look very similar. But when we look at trafficking, a lot of times what we notice, if it involves sex trafficking, is a child overtly sexually acting out in ways that are not appropriate for that age level. And that can lead us to seeing that maybe there's a little bit more going on here. The issue of truancy is a great red flag to look out for. And if you're dealing with a young person who actually outcries to you in any form or fashion, it is a form of child abuse and has to be reported. So we do recommend calling CPS, but there's also a national hotline that you can call to report trafficking. And it's 888-3737, 888, and it is specific to trafficking to report it.
Okay, we'll post that number up shortly, but we have a caller on the line. Mike, good evening. You're live on the air. How are you?
Hey, I'm really enjoying this show tonight. Great topic, and so really appreciating everybody's time and energy. I had a question, actually two questions for the panel, if they could answer it for me.
Okay.
Sure.
Go ahead.
One, what about the Port of Houston? Now that they're going to open the Panama Canal and there's going to be a lot more traffic coming in through the port, is there like a special task force assigned to the Port of Houston, since we're going to be expecting just a lot more ships and businesses coming in? I know that there was like 60 to 70% increase in the Asian market coming in, and I wanted to get your feedback on that. Is if there's anything being directed as far as security-wise for a lot of the trafficking, from what we understand, is also comes in through the Port of Houston.
Okay. And the second question? Before we...
Actually, there was a film that came out last year called Nefarious, and it's really gotten a lot of the churches together, even radio stations like KSBJ. It's a powerful documentary about sex trafficking. It's won numerous independent film awards, and so I would encourage everyone to see that because it's really it's enlightening what goes on, not only in the United States, but it's a broader view of what's taking place in sex trafficking ports all over the world. And it's it's a real tearjerker. So the film is called Nefarious, and they had a couple of private screenings here last year in a couple of churches. So I would encourage you guys to see that. It is a faith-based documentary, and a lot of churches are behind it. So this is why I'm really enjoying this program. So thank you for your time and energy.
I'm just curious, before you hang up, did you know that we were going to talk about this topic before you started watching the show?
No, I had no idea.
Okay, so you were just kind of flipping through the channels and you came across the show? I'm just curious.
And then, well, when I was flipping through the show, I saw Ben Mendez. I know Ben Mendez from years ago from the Hispanic Chamber and all that. And I went, hey, it's Ben. So then I started paying attention because, you know, Ben's a great guy. He's a great networker, and he just loves the community. And so I just want to kind of support.
Thank you, Mike.
He was
I'll pay you $20 later.
Right? Thanks, Mike.
Thank you,
Thanks for your
Mike.
call.
Thank you.
Okay, so two big questions there. But for the Port of Houston, I'll say there's not a specific task force for them because the Human Trafficking Rescue Alliance covers all 11 counties of the greater Houston metropolitan community, so they will also cover that as well. And they do a phenomenal job. They work on every tip they receive. They bring together everyone from the IRS to the Sheriff's Office to the FBI into one task force to work on this issue. So we know that they'll continue to do exactly what they're doing, no matter what's happening in the Port of Houston. As for addressing the increase in traffic through there, my suggestion for that is that what we need to do is better train the people that work there. We got a great process through the Texas legislature a couple of sessions ago that dictated that all new peace officers in the state of Texas had to be trained on human trafficking. It was a great step forward for us to really talk about training our law enforcement officers on how to recognize and then respond to a potential victim. And I think the same needs to be done for a variety of other people that work in different industries. And perhaps the Port of Houston is one of those, so that we can really start breaking down what it looks like for them specifically and then how to respond to it. As for Nefarious, yes, it is a movie that came out a little while ago. We've seen some great movement around it in churches across the U.S., and there's a lot of other great documentaries out there for people that are interested. My organization's website, houstonrr.org, has an entire resource page where you can find a number of documentaries. So if you're interested in the issue of sex trafficking, there are films about that. If you're interested in global trafficking, films about that. More domestic issues, we have films about that. So you're able to find something that really can get to the heart of whatever topic it is that really interests you.
So say one more time the website, and we're going to post it on the screen right now, and if we can leave it on there, I'd really appreciate it. So say the website and the phone number.
Sure. The website is houstonrr.org, and then the phone number, which is the national hotline, is 888-3737. 888. And I know that's a really weird order to put a phone number in, but it makes it really easy to remember. Just 888 bookends with 3737 in the middle. So two great resources, because the hotline is not just for tips, it's also for resources. You can get statistics, reports, what's happening around the country, around the globe. You move 12 hours from here and you want to know what's happening in the community you're in, you can call that hotline and they can tell you an organization there that you can get involved with. So it's really kind of a one-stop shop for this issue for the country.
You know, this topic here doesn't make Dr. Feelgood feel so good.
Right.
I just want your opinion. You know, what is the mindset, I guess, of the people that are actually doing this to our kids? Is it the power? Is it the money? What is the mindset?
Well, what I'm thinking is that if it's not the power of the money, it could be that they're being forced to do it as well. Because sometimes it's not that they're wanting to do that, but they're forced by somebody that's above them for the monetary benefit of it. So, but yeah, normally the people that are in charge of that have to be very ruthless, have to be inconsiderate, probably untrusting. So that's probably kind of the profile of a general somebody that would be involved in this kind of work.
Just plain old psychopaths, if anything else. I mean, how can someone put a child in that type of situation and abuse them in that nature?
Well, if you want to look at the technicality of it, a sociopath would probably be more appropriate because that's kind of
why
an
you're here, because I don't know the names. I just call them crazy.
In the old psychological terms, a sociopath was somebody who was kind of like remorseless, when it came to these kinds of things.
I think it's also important, though, for us to realize that the traffickers wouldn't have a job if there wasn't a demand for what they're offering. And so we have to, as a society, also take responsibility for that and recognize where that demand is coming from and start to address that. Because it's not just about recognizing the red flags and reporting it, it's about stopping it from happening. And that requires that we each take personal responsibility that, well, maybe if I knew where my products and goods were coming from, it wouldn't create a demand for slave labor to make them. Or why do we have a demand for child sex workers? Why is that there? And it's uncomfortable to talk about. It's something that a lot of people prefer to avoid because we might recognize it in someone we know. But we have to do that if we want it to stop.
Let's talk about that.
Let's talk about the law enforcement, because I'm just curious. Obviously, there's multiple agencies involved in investigations like this. Is it more so the federal? Is it the county? Is it the city? Who are the ones that are kind of taking the lead on this kind of stuff?
We've seen all of them in the Houston area, and that's one thing that Houston's actually recognized for nationally as our task force that brings all those elements together. It's the federal side through Homeland Security as well as through the FBI. It's the state level through TAVC and our attorneys. It's the county level with the sheriff's office and the county attorney's office. It's the local level with HPD and the constable's office. All of them have worked on cases, and they tend to work fairly well together here in Houston because we house them in one location. One of the head of our task force that we recommend law enforcement call with a tip is actually employed technically by the sheriff's office, but his office is at the FBI, so that they literally have to work together. But we also have a second task force here in Houston, which they're all together but considered a separate task force in some form or fashion, called the Innocence Lost Initiative. It's out of the FBI, and they work solely on child sex trafficking, or domestic minor sex trafficking as it's called. So we have both of those here. It really covers all levels for us in Houston, which is one thing we can be very thankful for, that we have them there, but also something that we have to realize there's a reason why they're there and why we need it, and start addressing it.
You know, I'm sure there's a lot of nonprofits that are involved also.
Yes.
And some people feel more comfortable going to someone that they know and versus going to the police. I just find it kind of difficult to reach some of those people. My opinion is that you really have to dig down deep, and you have to go to these schools and the communities to really find some of these people, because they're kind of hidden.
Yes.
And most of these kids are not in places that you and I would normally hang out. They're in the shadows. And so how do you find someone like that? I know you had mentioned there's signs, but how do you find someone like that?
Well, one of the big things that we try to do is actually train educators and teachers to recognize the recruitment process. So they actually recognize when that child is being seduced, so that they don't actually become a victim, and we can intervene before the abuse starts. So that's one method. And those signs include that they suddenly have products that you know their family can't afford, very wealthy gifts that someone's giving them. Where did they come from? Why do they have them? Or signs of branding, something that is often used through tattoos, and recognizing those and reporting it. And then as for the labor trafficking, it is something, and they knock on your door all the time. I had one last week knock on my door and try to sell me magazines. So it is something that we are all seeing, and recognizing that while that person at your door may not be being trafficked, you can still give them the number, and maybe they know someone who is, or maybe they don't know it yet, and when they do know it, you've planted that seed for them to be able to seek help.
Okay. Joseph is back on the line. Joseph, thanks for calling back.
Yes, I want to ask Kendra. She mentioned these different agencies that are involved in preventing human trafficking from children. But the question I want to ask is, how is Homeland Security involved in this? Could you please elaborate, Kendra?
And by the way, before you hang up, why don't you join us on the show live next week, because we'd love to get some of your input. You have some very good questions.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Seriously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Homeland Security is actually involved in a couple of ways. They're involved in the investigation whenever the victim is an international immigrant in this country, because a lot of times what we see is that the victim actually gets arrested before they get recognized as a victim, because they're the ones out there that people see and they actually report as a criminal, because what they're doing may be a crime, but then we have to be able to have those mechanisms in place to recognize they were committing a crime, but they were being forced to do it. And so Homeland Security is very well trained in how to do that, how to do those investigations when it involves an international immigrant, and how to get that immigrant connected to the right services for them, because they're very different from what we would give to a U.S. citizen. They have been pivotal in cases here in Houston, if you want to look at the specifics, the Mondragon case and the Salazar case. They were absolutely important because in both cases, the trafficker was an immigrant and so were the victims. And so Homeland Security had to be involved for the sake of following through with the punishment for the traffickers and also making sure the victims got plugged into the right treatment, the right services for them. Since they are the ones that deal with our immigration issues in this country, they have to be involved when it's an international
I'm not familiar with those cases. Can you elaborate about those cases?
Sure. The Mondragon case was in 2005. It was a case of sex trafficking. It was prosecuted as labor trafficking, though. The victims were recruited from Central America, promised really great jobs in the U.S., got up here, and were forced to work as bar girls to work off a debt, what we consider debt bondage and fraud. They were rescued. In 2005, we rescued right at 100 victims in one night and then had to figure out what to do with them. And then the Salazar case was a sex trafficking case. It was a family operation that would romance young girls in Mexico and bring them to Houston with this promise of creating a family and promise of a better life, and then force them to work in prostitution. They were rescued from multiple apartment complexes or multiple apartments here in Houston.
How many more or less were rescued?
I don't know the exact number on that one because the details have not been given out quite as much as on the Mondragon case, but I know it was somewhere around 20 or so.
Wow.
It was still quite a few victims. They were young girls in that case, and it was prosecuted as sex trafficking. Salazar escaped. There were 4 other individuals prosecuted. Prosecuted. They found him in Mexico and were awaiting extradition on that one.
Rob?
Yes, well, I was just wondering if I could give out my info on where they could find more articles and information about my
Sure.
work.
I mean, how does that-
My website is tresesiones.com in Spanish and 3sessions.com in English.
Okay. and
It's not Dr. Feelgood?
Not drfeelgood.com. That one was taken.
For more information on specifics on identifying some of these situations, I mean, both websites again. I mean, yours again?
Yes, HoustonRR.org. We have an entire list of red flags that you can look out for with trafficking and where to report it. The hotline numbers listed on there, as well as their direct email address if someone feels more comfortable with that than calling.
Awesome.
And by the way, we want to thank the callers, Mike and Joseph,
Yes.
for calling in.
Thank you so much. That was
Yeah.
awesome.
Now we know we have at least 2 viewers.
We have more than 2. Hi, Ben. Yeah. And thank
Thanks,
you so
Mom, for
much.
watching.
you're welcome.
Thank you so much for coming in, and we want to invite you back. If there's more information you want to provide or different topics specifically to what the work that's being done, please come back to the show.
Sure.
The community that's out there watching, thank you so much for watching, and we will be here one more week, and then we're going to be off for 2 weeks for the vacations, and this show is live. And if you have topics that you would like to discuss, please visit us on Facebook. It is LatinoTalkTV.com. Also on the website, email us or call us or however you want to do. But we want to put whatever you want to watch and what you want to discuss on the show. Okay? So thank you so much, and I hope you have a great holiday coming up in 2 weeks. You're watching Latino Talk TV. Good night.